What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the final Eat, Train, Prosper for the 2023 year. This will be our Instagram Q&A for the month of December. We have a really cool suite of questions that we will dive into. Some really good ones, some contextually appropriate ones, some funny ones as well, which helps with a little bit of the entertainment value of the episode. But as always, before we dive in, Bryan, can you run us quickly through some updates, please?
Yeah, I like the qualifier of quickly. Yeah, so I'll do my best to be as quick as possible here. So first off, I had my 2K row test. I've been talking about this for the last few weeks, how we've been kind of building toward this with Coach Mike T. Nelson. And it went better than I could have anticipated. So in the 5 or so days before the 2K test, he had me do a 2K at an RPE 8. And when I did my 2K at RPE 8 in the beginning, it was at 234 watts, I think. My all out was 273 watts. And then this time I did my RPE 8 and it was 260 watts. So that improved by like 24 watts, which made me feel pretty confident going in that I was going to beat the 273 when I kind of put my full gumption behind it. And then went ahead, nervous as all hell going into it, but ended up hitting 296 watts, which is a 23 watt improvement over 6 or 7 weeks prior. And as far as time, because I guess most people talk in time and not watts, it was 7:14 initially, and I did 7:03 the other day. So I knocked 11 seconds off of my 2K row time. And in theory, my quote VO2 max power, which is the power you can sustain on average for your VO2 max test, which is usually between 4 and 8 minutes, is now 296 watts, which is pretty cool. And Mike and I set our goal for working together to improve VO2 max, which who knows if that's actually happened. I mean, it could be that all I did was improve my efficiency on the rower and I didn't actually get more conditioned, which is possible, even possibly likely, because I did get significantly more efficient at the rower, but I did improve as well. And so overall, super positive, and I just couldn't be more amped with the way that turned out. The future cardio plans for me are that I told Mike I need about a 6 to 8 week break from VO2 max work, because essentially with this VO2 max prep, like 2 or 3 sessions a week are just these gut wrenching interval type things that leave me completely drained, more mentally than physically. But I told him I want to do about a 6 to 8 week more aerobic cycle where we're going to focus on longer endurance stuff that's lower effort, more like zone 2-ish type range. And that'll be a mix of like bike and row. And then I went ahead and signed up for a bike race on February 4th. It's called the Old Man Winter Rally. And so it's in the middle of winter. It's going to be cold. There's probably going to be snow on the ground. It's not like I'm racing for time. I mean, yes, I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but I'm not preparing to peak for this race in the middle of the snow. But it's a 30-mile race around Boulder. And so I'm kind of excited about that one as well. February 4th, give me something to look forward to, but not necessarily like train for per se. And then, I guess in March, when it starts to get warm again, Mike and I will delve back into some VO2 max work, see if we can get that row under the 7-minute mark and pick up more biking and kind of work towards some of the bike races that I have planned for the summer and stuff like that. So that's my first update. Let's kick it over to you, do an update, and we'll kick it back for my final 2 short updates here.
Yeah, let's do that. So with mine, kind of a really cool experience. So I was able to train with my first IFBB Pro yesterday. And Jackson and I, who obviously we train together quite frequently. Today, my friend John is going to train with us. It was a girl, actually, 23-year-old figure pro. She's from Germany. And what I was really interested to see is like this, we have, a pro coming in, like what are things like? And she was an absolute savage, right? Absolute savage. And we have very, very gnarly leg days. We're already like the hardest training people around, in the gyms and stuff here. And she was just a whole new level. And it really was very like eye-opening for me because our leg sessions were already really gnarly. And then she came in and was like, oh, we're going to add this and like do some of these things and those things. And she was very, very strong too. And it was like really, really cool to see like kind of just like a specimen, you know, in the flesh training and throwing down. And it was very, very cool, very humbling experience. And it was just, I thought it was pretty cool to share. Like, even if you think you're already always training like really, really hard or pushing yourself and stuff, like there's always new limits that you kind of just didn't know about because you haven't been exposed to them yet.
Interesting. Yeah. So I was just checking her out on Instagram as you were talking because I had to have a visual to go along with it. And the first thing that stood out to me is how wild it is when you look at these figure pros just in general and the off season versus in season, because her pinned images are her like winning the trophy and winning the competition and whatever. And she's super shredded and she looks quite lean. And then there's like, you scroll down just like 4 or 5 squares and there's pictures of her in the off season where she literally looks like one of the wellness pros, the ones that are, you know, the new IFBB category where you're all about the curves and the blah, blah, blah. And so I looked at that and I was like, wow, that's crazy that you go from that to that, because she still looked toned and muscular in the off-season photos, but nothing compared to how like thin, and I don't want to use the word emaciated because that's the wrong word to use, but compared to how she was in the off season, it's a very stark contrast. And so I'm guessing that you got her when you guys trained in the off season. And so she's looking that like thick, voluptuous version of herself.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just really cool to see. And like I said, she was strong. There was times where I might have only had like an extra, 10 kilo plate on each side for like compound leg stuff than she did, and like, fucking hell, I'm trying like the max I have, I was like literally pushing my limits. So it was a very, very cool experience. And then, right, we go in the sauna. We're like, oh, we go in the sauna after we train. The sauna sessions that we do are very challenging, right? It's about 85 degrees Celsius in there. I don't know that conversion. We do 17, 18 minutes. We've been doing 18 minutes. It's very mentally challenging, right? I get the notification from my watch like, hey, are your heart rates over like 130, as we're sitting in there? And she was like, oh, I can show you guys what we do in the saunas in Germany. And we're like, okay, yeah. And she just takes the like the water bucket and basically just emptied it onto the stones, which basically just creates this, it's steam, right? Yeah. And you ever hold your hand over like boiling water accidentally, whatever, and it like burns the shit out of you. Like that's what they did in the sauna. And there was a period after maybe like 20, 25 seconds after she did it where I got that like the I'm in danger signal from my body. It's like, we're in danger, And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay in here. And then fortunately, like it peaked and subsided, but now we have a whole new, level of challenge of the sauna where I didn't think the sauna could get any worse, and was a very humbling example of like, oh yes, it can. And now we have a new standard for the sauna, which makes it even more miserable than it already was.
That's funny. Yeah, I've seen that done many times in saunas that I've been in the past. And I was actually at a German resort called the Robinson Club when I was 18 or 20 years old or something in the Bahamas. And I was in there as a co-ed sauna and people were doing that as well. So that was kind of funny that it was a German and it was also a German there as well. Yeah, cool. Well, that's awesome. Now you can make it even harder. Cool. So last 2 updates for me. My family's been sick. I guess I should start with that. Vivi has been sick now for like a week on and off. She had like a fever and then she got better and she got another fever and got sent home from school. Kim's been sick. I've just yesterday got sick, I think. I don't know, off and on. Bryson's the only one that seems to have been able to just keep on living as if nothing's happening. But I was so tired yesterday. I woke up and had this low-grade headache and sore throat and just didn't really feel like training. But funny enough, all of my wearable metrics told me that I was in the best shape I've been in for a while. It said I slept 8 hours and 40 minutes. And my HRV was like 250. My resting heart rate was 42. And literally everything on my wearables was saying, dude, you're in great shape. Go train, crush this. And everything in my mind and body was like, I have no motivation. I feel so tired. I don't feel great. And ultimately, I decided to listen to myself and not to my wearables. And I had a number of people write me and comment on this post that I put up on my story yesterday about this topic specifically, being like, wow, that's so crazy that you like listen to yourself, or, you know, that's a really great message to, you know, ignore your wearables and all these things. And I was like, really? Because I mean, not to throw shade or anything, but like always, I feel like it's most important to listen to the way that you feel and the feedback that your body is giving you. And in contrast to this situation, there's been many times where my wearables will tell me I slept like shit. My HRV is down. My resting heart rate is up, but I feel like fucking awesome. And so I'm going to go do a double session. I'm going to do some lifting. I'm going to do some biking later, and it's all good, you know? And so I will always 100% of the time, make a decision on how I feel before I look at my wearables. So I wake up in the morning, I'm like, hey, how was my sleep? Make an assessment. How do I feel? Make an assessment. How's my heart rate? How's my internal state of being? And then after I've assessed all of that, then I look at my wearable and I'm like, what does the data say? And then from there, you know, I can kind of parse the two together or whatever and make a decision. But I think it's a great lesson. And I think it's important to remember that how did we do this before wearables? We listen to the way that we feel, and everyone's been doing fine. We don't need to trust our wearables implicitly. So yeah, just a general lesson. And I can't say I feel a ton better today, to be honest. I only slept 7 hours last night because we have this podcast in the morning. I still have a low grade headache. I still have a low grade sore throat. But I'm probably going to push through and train today because unless I'm like actually sick with a fever, I'm not going to go 2 days in a row without training usually, unless it's planned. So I'm going to train today and we'll see what happens, but just wanted to share that with you guys. And then last update here, I was going to do some musings on the Data Driven Strength podcast that just dropped yesterday. There was a 4-hour episode with Greg Nuckols where they talked about the effective reps model. And so as giddy as I could possibly be waking up in the morning to see a 4-hour podcast with Greg Nuckols drop, I made it through about half of it. And so I think maybe what we'll do is open up the new year in January and talk about the podcast or the effective reps model a little bit more in depth with some of this new information. But I just want to drop how wild it is that they spent the first 2 hours of this podcast trying to debunk the idea that that there's people out there that actually believe in this. They have two versions of the effective reps model. They call it the hard model and the easy model. The hard model basically says that only the final 5 reps are stimulative for hypertrophy, and that anything prior to 5 reps is not contributing to hypertrophy. And then the easy model is the one that says, hey, there may be some stimulus before 5 reps, but as you get closer to failure, you're likely going to achieve more hypertrophy relative to the prior rep. So going to failure would be better than going to 1. Going to 1 would be better than going to 2 in this kind of exponential increase or linear increase or whatever it is of stimulus. It just blew my mind that they had to spend the first 2 hours of the podcast debunking the hard version, as if there's this like whole crew of people out there that are like, yeah, if you don't at least get to 5 RIR, you're getting 0 stimulus. When Mike Zordos and others have made a living literally showing that you can volume equate and you can get gains at 8 reps from failure or 6 reps from failure or whatever. You just have to do a shit ton of volume. But that basically completely debunks the idea that there's no stimulus short of 5 reps. And I only can assume that this is mostly driven by the Paul Carter world and all the people that follow Paul, because him and Beardsley are so big on the hard version of the effective reps model. But anyway, it just blew my mind, and I'm obviously going to listen to the last 2 hours and kind of see what they say from there. But I was just surprised by that.
Yeah, I'm probably, maybe I'll listen to it during cardio. That feels like a good kind of time spent, but that just sounds daunting. I'm going to be honest, right? And I'm not a big Greg Nuckols fan.
You've said that before,
and I don't like listening to him. I respect him in that I feel like he will argue the science, right? And I have to respect his professionalism of that, even in many times where personally I feel like the science may represent that, but that's likely because of a gap of like real world kind of research or something like that on it. Like I'm not even going to go on any further, but we'll talk about it. There's a lot of questions to get into, and not everyone doesn't need my opinion right now.
Yeah, for sure. I love Knuckles' cynicism. I think that it's a much needed viewpoint in the industry. So we'll leave it at that and pick it up in the new year.
Yep.
Cool.
Ready to dive in?
Yeah, man.
All right, let's kick this first one over to you. How much does running truly inhibit muscle gain?
I think the answer is in the dose. If you're running 5-10 miles a week and you're a relatively decent runner, I don't think there's a huge implication at all. If you're a pretty poor runner and you're running 10 miles a week, that might be way too much of a dose, and it will in fact impact your muscle growth. There is a point where even if you're a good runner, it probably will impact muscle growth. And that's just, the same thing I experienced through 8 to 11 hours a week of biking in the off season. Running, as we've talked about in prior podcasts, does have a bit of a different impact than cycling does due to the impact with the ground. So that is one thing that you do have to consider when you're thinking of choosing a cardio modality, is that there is eccentric loading through the process of running. And thus there is some muscle damage where a concentric based activity like biking or elliptical or rowing or something like that is not going to really cause significant muscle damage in the same way that running will. So I don't know. I think we would need a little bit more context and detail to answer that with more detail. So I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that answer?
I mean, the only thing I would say is like, how far along are you on your muscle gain journey, right? Mm-hmm. Like, where are you in an approximate relative to like your FFMI or another metric you want to use? Are you chasing your last like little bits of gains as an advanced athlete? Yeah, it probably will. Are you an intermediate plus who still has an intermediate, that has a lot of hypertrophy room ahead of you? It probably won't. What is your propensity if you're someone who has like there's those, wonderfully gifted people who just have great leg genetics and have these sweet, juicy, jacked legs, and they only have to train them once per week. And if that's the case, like, it may not inhibit you at all. But there's many other factors that are in play and a lot of individual variability within them.
Yeah. And then just to add one last piece on top of that, the amount of food you're consuming is going to be a huge factor in whether running mitigates your muscle gains or not. I mean, You can get away with running 20 miles a week or whatever if you're eating 5,000 calories a day or whatever, just to throw random numbers out there. If you're fueling your activity, there's probably a lot more of it that you can recover from. So probably worth keeping in mind.
The last thing I'll add there, and then we should move on. It depends on what type of running you're doing. If you're doing like sprints on a treadmill or something like that, like it may help you, to be completely honest. Like, look at sprinters, look at any kind of Olympic sprinter, like, they're fucking jacked. You know what I mean? If you're doing like short sprinting and not duration stuff, like, it may help muscle gain, right? I believe, don't quote me, I believe there is some research that you can find on that.
I mean, it also depends on your level of advancement again, because
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool.
Okay. Number 2, Bryan, the hard part is getting started back into cardio again. How or why?
How? Yeah. The question was how, with like 18 W's. So how would be to do it slowly and diligently. First, I would say choosing a modality that probably doesn't beat you up. So we can go right back to question 1 and say, hey, running has impact. It's probably going to be a lot harder for you to recover from something like that. Jordan Lips just went through his journey of basically introducing cardio into his life 6 months ago and preparing for a half marathon run that he just completed 2 days ago. So great work, Jordan. Congratulations. He crushed it. One of the big lessons that he's talked about a lot with me and through his podcast and stuff is that he took it so slowly from the beginning, because running does have this impact. He started with, I think it was 3 cardio sessions a week. One of them was biking. He did a bunch of like high volume work on the bike. He did a running technique session where literally all his running was perfect form. I don't want to say no intensity, but the focus of his running sessions was to do these shorter intervals at an aerobic pace. So think a pace you could do for 40 minutes, but you're only going to do it for 1 or 2 minutes because you just want to make sure that your form is perfect. And I think that lesson can be transferred to whatever cardio modality you choose. Make sure that your efficiency in that movement is improving more than focusing on what the dose of that cardio is going to do to your conditioning levels. So the type of cardio you're doing really matters as far as how much you do initially. You can get away with doing a lot more if you're doing a bike than if you're doing running. Things with jumping and impact are just going to be a little bit harder on your body. So you need to take them slower and make sure your form is perfect. Like if you're doing 1,000 box jumps for your cardio, like you better be damn sure that your box jump form and your landing is on point, right? Running in a sense is just like a smaller version of a box jump. You're just doing thousands and thousands of reps over and over again. So you really do have to make sure to keep your body healthy through lower doses of that to start. It seems like based on the question that part of this is probably mental, or a large portion of it is probably mental. And so I think trying to set goals for yourself here that have you doing insane amounts of volume for someone just starting out is probably a bad idea, because now you're going to feel like you're letting yourself down if you don't hit all of these sessions that you've pre-planned for yourself. And so again, starting prudently with something like maybe 2 times a week of 20 to 30 minutes is probably like a really good starting place that still allows you to get your lifting in. It still allows you to have your life. And literally we're talking about an hour in a week, 178 hours in a week or whatever that number is. I don't know. It's something like that. And you're talking about spending like 1 hour of that per week across 2 sessions. So I would just say start slow, take care of your body, make sure you're fueling it, and up the dose gradually as you begin to enjoy it more, as you become more conditioned, as it feels easier, all those things.
Only thing I will add there is kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Come prepared with like something to watch or listen to, or something that it doesn't feel like you're just sitting there like staring at the wall as you're doing cardio. Like I queue up YouTube videos of things I want to learn, maybe some podcasts, maybe some anime episodes or something like that. Like I generally don't mind it. So that's what I would recommend.
Cool. Aaron, what do you think is more important? Absolute mechanical tension or SFR, which stands for stimulus to fatigue ratio?
I am going to go with absolute mechanical tension. Bryan, what is your take?
It's harder than I would have initially thought. I do think I lean toward mechanical tension, and we have other questions that kind of get to this same point later on, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. But with hypertrophy, like mechanical tension, yes, absolutely. SFR is extremely important too, because, and I'll just throw an example out here. You and I have talked a lot about how in the pendulum squat, doing sets of say 4 to 6 reps feels more like joint heavy or systemically heavy than it does muscularly stimulative. And so if we're doing a heavy set of 4 to 6 on the pendulum, we're probably getting more mechanical tension than we would in a set of 10 to 12 on the pendulum, because the load is heavier. There's more tension on the muscle per se per rep. But I don't know that necessarily means that sets of 4 to 6, or even if we want to stay in the hypertrophy range, 5 to 7 are better than sets of 10 to 12 or something along those lines. So I do think that there is something to what that stimulus to fatigue ratio feels like within the context of exercise selection, the way it fits into the remainder of your program, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the reason I went with the mechanical tension is the stimulus to fatigue ratio is something that I feel like people treat it as an absolute when it's quite dynamic, right? Let's say we get into let's use the pendulum squat, right? Maybe your work capacity is garbage. You start taking people who would typically just do your 3 sets of 8 or whatever, and you start taking them to 2 RIRs and 1 RIRs or anything like that, or God forbid, rest pause sets or whatever. it's going to feel like the first day you rocked up to a CrossFit class, got your dick pushed in. When you do that, repeatedly, like your fatigue threshold increases as adaptations occur. Another thing with stimulus to fatigue ratio could be like inefficiency and movement pattern.
Yeah.
If you suck at doing RDLs and they smoke your lower back, right, that SFR ratio is going to be like, well, I guess it would be a low ratio.
It would. Yeah. No, it would be terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
Very high fatigue, very low stimulus, but it's because your movement pattern is poor. So I would say like your stimulus to fatigue ratio you can tip that ratio in your favor with increasing work capacity, repeated bout effect, which increases your overall adaptation to a failure or proximity to failure threshold, and through your movement execution. Mm-hmm. So even with those, I would still probably say mechanical tension I would still place my vote there, even if assuming we maxed out our stimulus to fatigue ratio in terms of the improvements we could make.
I kind of think you made the point for stimulus to fatigue ratio there, though, because like in an RDL example, if you're butchering form and your low back is rounding, the tension is shifting off the target muscle, et cetera, but you're using a heavier load. So you're doing 365 for sets of 8 on the RDL, but your form could be better. Or you're doing 315 for 8 on the RDL, but your form is primo and you're really hitting the muscles you want to hit. You're getting less mechanical tension in theory because you're using less weight, but you're directing that mechanical tension more acutely to the areas that you want it to go to. And thus stimulus to fatigue ratio would become more important than mechanical tension. So it's a great question, and it's a thought experiment for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You are right. I did I staked my claim and then made a case against it, which I guess I ultimately do agree with. But what I would say there is, don't take like a stimulus to fatigue ratio at face value. Think about how can I improve it on exercises that maybe like crush you, where are your inefficiencies or what can be improved upon there. But yeah, I guess stimulus to fatigue ratio potentially I would say is more important than just stacking up as much load as you could put on there. Cause that's exactly how I train, right? When I know if something's like too heavy, I can move it for 4 reps, but it feels like dog shit. I'd rather back it down, get my reps up to like that, maybe 6 to 7 mark, and not just load through my hips and glutes and, put the tension where I want it into my quads and stuff. So personally, that's exactly how I do train. So I guess officially changing my answer.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess once stimulus fatigue ratio is locked in and you have that dialed in, then it becomes mechanical tension. So doing 320 is better than doing 315, assuming that form is the same. So it's certainly complicated, and there's an intermix of the two for sure.
Yeah. Okay, this one I will kick over to you first. Yep. When training zone 2, how quickly should you get into that range?
Yeah, I mean, that range is pretty low. When we're talking about 60 to 70% of maximum heart rate, or 180 minus age being like the peak end of zone 2 is kind of the way I like to look at it. So if we take 180 minus age, that would put my peak at 139. And I just try to stay below 139 for most of my zone 2. I think that works pretty well. People get in trouble, by the way, if you take 140 minus age and you make that the middle of your zone 2 range. Now we're in trouble because you're going to spend most of your time in zone 3. So I think if you're going to use 140 minus age, think of that as the top of your zone 2. But either way, getting there, it shouldn't take long. I've done it both ways. I've done it where I get on my bike and I immediately get up to 135 and I'm just there. And then I've also done it where I'll take 5 or 10 minutes and hang out in like the 110s or 110s and then up into the 120s. And then over 5 or 10 minutes, I'll kind of work my way up into the 130s. And I guess if I was put on the spot, I would say that taking 5 or 10 minutes to more gradually get there does tend to lead to a lower perceived exertion once you're in zone 2. But I think that even if you spent 5 or 10 minutes at zone 2 and you got there immediately, you would still achieve the same lower RPE after 5 or 10 minutes. You would just feel like maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes were harder than you probably wanted them to be. So I do tend to veer slightly more towards the take 5 minutes, gradually work your way up into zone 2. And it generally tends to produce, I think, a better RPE effect for your zone 2 work. There was one other thing I was going to say on this. Oh yeah, heart rate drift or cardiac drift. So over the course of a training session, usually you will experience heart rate drift, which means that your heart rate goes up even though you're not doing more effort. And so it's really hard to know if you're doing more effort unless you have a gauge for watts, or say you're running and you have a pace. But what you would notice, just because running is an easy example, if you're running a 9-minute mile pace, your heart rate might start at 130 without changing your pace at all. 20 minutes later, your heart rate won't be at 130 anymore. So thus, you're not actually, in theory, working harder, but your body is perceiving it as harder work. And so because we know that heart rate drift or cardiac drift occurs in pretty much everyone except super elite advanced athletes in zone 2, I think that it would be prudent for you to give your body 10 beats to go up over the course of your session. So if my goal is to say end my cardio session, or if my peak heart rate is 140, 139, as I said earlier for my zone 2 work, I probably want to start at 129. So that gives me 10 beats to kind of let my heart rate drift up without increasing my effort. So hopefully that made sense. Do you have anything to add to that? I think you're on mute. No. Okay. Let's kick this one over to you because I think it's a great question and I definitely have a lot to say on it as well. If you become a leg extension god, would that translate to big quads or just big rec fem, rectus femoris?
I mean, I think you can get overall, your rec fem is going to get a primary of that tension, but I think you can get big, right? Big is a subjective term here. Let's be quite clear. Quads, like I know in your performance of it, you can do things that can kind of bias some of where attention goes. Like I will perform my leg extensions in a way where I want to really focus on my VMO and I get a much better stimulus there. Yeah, it can work. I don't think it would work better than including bilateral and unilateral squat pattern movements because of the increase in tension that you can place in the greater degrees of knee flexion and stuff under that tension. But I don't think, like, let's say you're just doing like 12 sets per session or something like that, and you're loading them up and progressively overloading and maybe training 2 or 3 sets in like a sub 10 rep range, 2 or 3 sets in like a 10 to 20, and then maybe a super high rep, rest pause set or something. Like, let's say that's all you have, or something, maybe some spinal kind of issue that you can't really do any bilateral, squat pattern loading or something. I think you can be productive with them, just not as productive as with them and another, more hypertrophic movement.
Yeah, I think we should first clear up that the leg extension trains all the quad muscles. Like you're not just training the rec fem when you do a leg extension. The thing is that the leg extension, by trapping the hip in that position, it does send more of the bias to the rec fem, which is something that we can't get in these bilateral squat patterns that also involve hip extension. But that literally doesn't mean that the leg extension isn't also training your vastus lateralis, your VMO, and, other pieces of the quad up through the stream. So I think that you could get plenty of great quad development doing just leg extensions, especially if you have like one of the Strive or Prime machines where you can train more of the distal loading through lengthened overload. You can train more of the proximal loading through short overload. And then even if you don't have a Prime or Strive machine, you could train the leg extension machine and sissy squats. And both of those are generally seen to be primarily rec fem movements, but both of them are going to slay your entire quad setup. And so, yeah, I mean, if you did leg extensions and you did sissy squats, I think you'd have plenty of quad development. You might reach a point where you're like, oh, well, based on the way that I perform these, I'm getting more stimulus to the medial portions of my quad or to the lateral portions of my quad or whatever. And so maybe, in your sissy squat, you can spread your feet out wider and point your toes out. And then boom, you get a little bit more adductor in there. Or you can narrow your feet, put them right together and go straight forward. And now you get a little bit more of that medial part of the quad. So I do think that is a viable option to get great quads. I don't know that I would use the term. He said, if you're a leg extension god, what was the exact rule? You would translate to big quads or just big Rec Fem. I don't think that you would become a quad god by doing this, but I think that you would have plenty big quads.
Yeah, really, really well put there. Moving on, does absolute load matter in an exercise? For example, deficit Bulgarians versus a hack or a high bar squat.
Yeah, so this is what I was referring to in the prior question where they were asking about absolute mechanical tension or SFR, because I think that this question kind of plays into a similar question. And so simply my answer is that absolute load does not matter at all when you're talking about different exercises, because the joint angles are different, the loading parameters are different, the biomechanics of the movement are different. And thus, what you really should focus on is taking your quad to failure or close to failure in the movement that you're using. And if that is a deficit Bulgarian where you're using a 40-pound dumbbell in one hand and you're using 300 pounds on a hack squat, I don't necessarily think that the hack is going to be a more productive hypertrophy exercise for you than the deficit Bulgarians. I just don't, like, in any way. I think your body knows tension, and as long as you're supplying that tension to the target muscle, that's really what matters.
Yeah, I don't really have anything on the back end of that one. You answered it brilliantly.
Cool. This one I'll send over to you. Fasted versus not fasted before a workout. Is that goal dependent, or what's best?
Let's be clear. Not fasted before a workout will always be optimal for performance in that workout. Even if your goal is fat loss or anything like that, from a performance standpoint, you will perform better with energy and fuel in your system. Now, that doesn't mean that any fuel would be best. Like I would recommend not having like a very high fiber meal or loads of, dietary fat in that pre-workout meal, as that can maybe fuck with your stomach, maybe cause you to vomit during a training session, or just have a stomach pain, which obviously makes producing a quality training session more difficult. But let's say we're intelligently putting in a pre-workout or non-fasting meal. Yes, it would be best to not fast before workouts.
Yeah, so this question didn't specify cardio or weightlifting. And I think my natural response initially was to think about weightlifting, but it could have been applied to either one. But I don't think my answer really changes, which is that I don't think being fasted is the best approach. So when you look at the research on training fasted, the reason people would do this in the past was because they believed that they were burning a higher percentage of fat over carbohydrate. And that's actually true. You are burning more fat when you do it fasted than you are carbohydrate. However, what we find on the back end of this throughout the rest of the day is that then your body actually burns fewer calories throughout the remainder of the day because of the response in your metabolism or whatever. Maybe you can clean that up for me. But whatever that was, like, your body somehow burns fewer calories in the remainder of the day because you did that session fasted. Whereas if you went into that session fed, you would have worked through the calories that you provided to fuel the session, and then also had a higher metabolic rate through the remainder of the day. So it is kind of like a weird thing to grasp. And I was late to jump off the fasted bandwagon because in my youth, in my teens and 20s, I did fasted cardio and even fasted training quite often because I believed that it would help me shed body fat or keep me leaner. And I think in a sense it did that. And I was scared that if I ate before these sessions, that somehow I would lose that additional body fat impact. Of course, that was unwarranted. And as it turned out, it made no difference. And in fact, I found I had higher quality sessions when I would consume food prior, or calories prior, I could say. So yeah, I think in general, you don't have to have a ton of food. And I think that's one confusing place for people, is they think I need to have a full meal, or, I need to hit my minimum MPS threshold or something along those lines. Like, I must have 40 grams of protein or it's pointless. Like, you could literally have an apple and a string cheese and a handful of almonds or something like that. Like, I don't think that I mean, I know there's fat there and whatever, but I think what?
It's primarily fats, and then that's just why I wouldn't do it. It's not that there's like some fat, but like the string cheese and the almonds, I just purposely wouldn't include a lot of fats.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, fats are going to digest slower and they're blah, blah, blah. But like, I mean, just having food in your body, I think has a satiating effect that helps. And I use the almonds example because literally the other day before a bike ride, I had an apple and some almonds and I was just like, I don't want a full meal, but I want something in my belly. And so that satiated me enough until I got home and I had chicken and rice or whatever. But yeah, I mean, so what you eat does matter in a sense. Like you don't want a bunch of fat slopping around in your body, but just putting something in that's carbohydrate and protein based and a small dose of it should be helpful.
Yep.
All right. Who wins in a cage match? Peter Attia or Andrew Huberman?
My money is on Huberman after seeing that video of him carrying that rock up that mountain or hill or whatever they were doing. He didn't have a shirt on. Huberman's more jacked than I would have given him credit for, for being a science guy with 2 million followers or whatever, right? Like a lot of people will talk about training and stuff. But when you saw him, like he's got a good amount of muscle mass, right? Not that is obviously a great carryover for cage fighting, but I will put my money on Huberman in this question.
So yeah, I love this question. I think Huberman looks more formidable. Just looking at him, like maybe it's because his head is big, or like his body mass seems to be more dominating. I think Peter Attia is like 180 pounds, maybe 185 at 5'10", something like that. I don't know this for sure, but if I had to guess, I'd say Huberman's in the 200s. Now I'm actually really curious. How much does Huberman weigh? But yeah, I think it's what? Stop it. This can't be right. It says he's 6'1" and 165 pounds. There's no way. But yeah, anyway, I think Huberman looks more formidable, and I think he may have a background in some fighting stuff too, although I could be wrong about that. But either way, I'm also going Huberman.
There we go.
Aaron, what muscle group makes you look the most jacked? It's got to be traps, right?
I think what the terminology used here is in the word jacked. Yeah, I think I would associate that with someone that you see who's just like, they just look big in a shirt, and I'm going to say, I will agree with you. Yes, I would say traps.
Yeah, I'll say traps too, but I think that most people are probably going to perceive traps as upper traps. And I think that the answer is all the traps. It's the upper traps, the mid traps, and the lower traps, because when you develop that entire structure of the traps through the mid and upper back, that's what makes you look like that gorilla that kind of just like so formidable and powerful. So yeah, I think traps. I think a close second and maybe even third would be chest and glutes. I think that chest, where you can wear a shirt and have that chest really protrude out, is a really strong feature. And then I think when you look at people that just have a big ass, you're just like, yeah, that person can move weight. And I think that's a bit powerful as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Aaron, in your experience, what has led to the best arm growth in your training career?
So I think what I'll do is I will take this from the triceps standpoint. I have significantly overdeveloped triceps relative to my biceps, and I feel like I don't feel qualified to answer the biceps question. I have done a lot of dips in my youth and through like many years. Dips have always been a staple. I've done them for like high rep kind of volume at the end of the workout sort of stuff. Accumulate 100 in as few sets as possible. I've also progressively overloaded them as like, trained them in the like 5 to 7, rep range, very, very heavy. It's compound-esque, tricep exercise. I've just done so many dips. I would say that would be my top choice.
What if we were to take this question less from which exercise has been most productive for you, and more from the perspective of, in programming, how have you programmed arm work and where did you find it most effective in your programming? Like having a separate arm day, putting it, as a push-pull legs, like can you specify what was most effective about it in your programming?
To be completely honest, like I have a hard time answering this question because before I really even knew about programming and intelligent program design or whatever, like I already had pretty big arms just from pushing them really, really hard and literally just doing a shit ton of dips. I would say, you know, with the knowledge I have, if I were to like say, hey, I want to grow my arms, you know, specifically more, I would do a lot of still like compound pressing-esque, like close grip, like an incline close grip Smith machine sort of press, kind of like a Smith machine JM press on an incline will be one. We do that. I would still keep in like the heavy dips. I wouldn't be doing a lot of like push downs and those sorts of things. I would be loading like under load in the like mid lengthened to lengthened bias range and really push that for my triceps.
Yeah, no, good answer. I actually have a sense that the question was asked from that latter perspective, just because I know who was asking it. Yeah. But so my answer also is very similar to yours. It would be, I did a shit ton of dips in my youth. I would actually put dips both on chest day and on arm day. So when I've talked a lot about recently how I used to do this Max OT program, that's what I'm basing my new bro split on that I'm starting January 22nd. And in that program that I would do back in the day, I would always have dips at the end of chest sessions and I would have them at the beginning of tricep sessions. So I'd be dipping twice a week. And I think that that was super productive. I also did a lot of that like mid-lengthened overhead tricep work that you were talking about. And so there were two main movements that I would use for this. I would use an easy bar. I don't want to call it a skull crusher because I don't think that going to your skull actually optimizes the length on the tricep. And so I would actually go all the way behind my head to the point where I would actually get some shoulder elevation there. And so, yes, if you're going to be nitty gritty biomechanics guy, by me doing that, I'm recruiting a bit of lat, probably a little bit of pec minor. It's starting to look a little bit more like a pullover and a little bit less like a tricep extension. You could call it almost like a hybrid between those two. But I remember getting up to 135 pounds on an easy bar tricep extension pullover, whatever you want to call it, and doing that for sets of 6 to 8. And that just roasted my triceps. I mean, if you ever want to talk about the rationale for letting form get a little loose or whatever, that's one case where I think that deep stretch that you get through the long head of the tricep at that extended position is pretty unmatched. So the combo of dips and those definitely helped. I think I can't be sure, but I think having my own arm day, it must have helped because I did that a lot through the Max OT days. Like I never did chest and triceps and back and biceps together. It was always chest on its own, back on its own, because my rationale was that I would be training arms during those sessions as like secondary muscle groups. And then I would be hitting them again on their own arm day. So I was thinking that, you know, frequency being a little bit higher, one day primarily focused, one day more secondarily focused. That seemed to work pretty well for me. I think getting really strong on pull-ups is a huge factor too, especially supinated. So that was a main pull-up variation that I did when I was younger, along with all those weighted dips, was I did a ton of supinated weighted pull-ups and I got really, really strong at those. And then I did a lot of incline dumbbell curls. At the time, we didn't know about cable face-away curls, but I did a ton of incline dumbbell curls and I did them really heavy. Again, I would say a little bit of form not being entirely perfect, kind of similar to that overhead tricep extension I referenced. But I got up to a point where I was doing 60-pound dumbbells on the incline curl for sets of 8-ish. And yeah, they weren't perfect. And yeah, I was rotating as I would turn. It wasn't completely supinated the entire time. I may have had a little bit of torso manipulation in the final rep or two. But that's another thing I've kind of come around on, is that on bicep work, I almost feel like there's a bit of benefit in getting slightly loose with your form at the end of a set, just because they're a low fatigue movement. And I feel like there's a lot of benefit to be had, especially in a movement like an incline curl that's mid-range overloaded, like you're fighting gravity. If you can get enough momentum to get through that tough part, you can bang out a couple more reps and get more tension through the lengthened position at the bottom. So yeah, that's my kind of long-winded answer there.
I think that's pretty good.
Cool.
Bryan, I'm going to kick this one over to you first. Mm-hmm. Let's take what this question asker is calling the big three off the board. The big three being sleep, movement, and nutrition. What, and I'm using air quotes here, wellness, end air quotes, practice is most impactful to you? Some examples that the question asker provided were sauna, cold plunge, meditation, journaling, etc.
Yeah. Great question. Great question. It's my buddy Greg. I honestly looked at this question and I've had to think about it a little bit because sleep, movement, and nutrition are like, I feel like you could do none of those other things. And if you nail sleep, movement, and nutrition, you're probably pretty golden. So to be completely honest, I don't journal. I've been considering journaling. I think that it would be good for me. I don't do it. I also don't sauna and I don't cold plunge. And I just recently started meditating, like literally this week. And so when I say meditating, I don't even know if I feel comfortable calling it that meditating. I'm actually in my brain, I'm calling it a stillness practice. And that I think allows me to meditate with less pressure, because when I think of meditating, I get a little in my head thinking that I'm focusing on my breath, but then I'm thinking about something and I shouldn't be thinking about something because I should be focusing on my breath, and like all these kind of head games that go on. And so by thinking of this as a stillness practice where I'm just still, my eyes are closed and I'm inside myself and I'm just breathing. And then I let my thoughts kind of do whatever they do. I just started that like literally a week ago. And I don't want to say it's transformative because it's way too early for me to say something crazy like that. But I have found significant benefit in it, especially because I tend to do it at points of the day where I don't get anxious really too often, but I feel like a minor unsettling inside myself where I've been working a lot. I feel very like kind of amped up and I can't seem to get myself to calm down. And so then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to do my stillness practice for the day, and I'll shut my computer. I'll set myself in a comfortable position on the couch, take my headphones out, close my eyes, and breathe. And I tend to do this for about 10 minutes, just deep breath in, breath out, breath in, breath out, all through the nose. And something happens around 40 or 50 breaths, like around the 7 or 8 minute mark, where I almost kind of have a slight outer body experience. And I almost, it sounds silly. I wonder if anyone can relate to this, but I almost feel like my body is like an accordion, where when I breathe in, it's like I'm expanding the accordion, and then I breathe out and I'm compressing the accordion, and I get this kind of visual oscillating in and out thing going on in my head. And I will finish that 10-minute session and just feel so calm and much more relaxed. And so that would be my answer.
Yeah, when I was reading through the questions as well, this one, I was like, man, this is a good question. I honestly, even as I'm about to start speaking about it, I don't have a really solid answer. I don't like meditating. I'm very scatterbrained. My brain races all the time. I don't like it, right? I'm just being honest. Journaling, I don't do. The cold plunge, I would say the cold plunge has been very, very beneficial for me in times of my life where I have needed it, where I've had a little bit of, you could say like depressive symptoms. I can't, in good honesty said, I've experienced like what I would consider like true depression, but I've had like very strong periods of like, I believe anhedonia is the terminology, where like the colors don't really, life just feels gray. And the ice bath is wonderful for that. I don't practice it regularly, even though I'm in the sauna 5 to 7 days per week. I cannot say that would be wellness for me. There's nothing I get more anxiety about each week than the fucking sauna. So that cannot be a wellness for me. Honestly, the thing that I think it's not one of the options there is alignment. You know, I've never felt better about my life than when all aspects of it have been in alignment with my values and morals. You know, my life revolves around fitness and lifting weights and nutrition and taking care of, you know, the one body you're given and those sorts of things. It's how I pay my rent. It's how I, you know, make my life. It's how I make friends. It's where I met my girlfriend. Like everything in my life is around that. And I will say that my life has become orders of magnitude better as I just doubled down on the things that I cared about and stopped trying to participate in parts of life that are things that I don't care about. So just aligning my life with the things that are important to me and pretty much just ignoring in minimizing participation in things that are not has been very, very beneficial for me.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. I love that you went off the board there. And I'll just, on the back of that, I'll just say that I don't know if it fully fits into the model supplied here, but I think waking up with something that you look forward to every day is so clutch. Like hopping out of bed and not being like, oh crap, another work day where I'm going to be downtrodden and I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do that. And like basically waking up with this
purpose.
Yeah. Having a purpose, having a, what's the Carol Dweck book, the mindset book, it's not a positive mindset, but anyway, yeah. So basically having a mindset that, gives you a purpose, I think is a great way of saying that. And when you wake up in the morning, like what is it that you're looking forward to? Having something each day that kind of drives you to get out of bed and do your best.
Yeah. It really flips a lot of life on its head. Like the days, I know like Mondays, Tuesdays are like really big, important days, but like it could be a Sunday, it could be a Monday. Like I'll have a great day. I work pretty much every single day anyway. And I definitely do not mind it. So I would definitely say like the alignment is a really big part of it for me.
Growth mindset is the word I was looking for. Growth mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So this question is long. I'm going to kick it over to you and let you take first stab at it.
Yeah.
How do you push past brain failure? There are some movements like leg press, hack squat, where I reach the bottom of the rep and get stuck, not because it hurts and I don't want to do another rep, but it's like my brain won't let me push. I should add, I've only been lifting for 6 months, so it may be a newbie thing. Also, I currently train 5 days a week and I'm worried that I may need to decrease to 4 days a week and reduce my overall volume. What do you recommend to people in this situation?
Number one, make sure it is not like you're in pain and that's why your body's like not allowing you to push, right? If your hack squat form is garbage and your knees are all valgused or something is going on, if your leg press is like cranking on your lower back or something like that, make sure that you have those bases covered. 2, get a training partner or improve your training environment where you have a spotter who can literally have you call when the set ends. That is one simple, hack that will revolutionize your training, because you might feel like this is the last rep, this is all I have, but it's still moving really, really fast and you're not hitting a sticking point. That spotter can be like, no, you have at least 2 more. And unless you're physically going to quit on that person, which again externalizes the responsibility, you will typically end up pushing more. So those are the first two parts to answer the question specifically. On the beginner aspect, increase your calories, right? Increase your calories. If you've only been training 6 months, make sure food is high. The research does support this. You are in the time where you can make the fastest gains and run the highest caloric surplus from a relative, baseline to your maintenance perspective. Push your calories. You can drop down training to 4 days per week. You could also keep it at 5. It's unlikely that it's the overall volume unless you're doing that, 52 sets per week thing that's been floating around. But assuming that you're young because you're 6 months into training, you can handle a lot of volume because your joints are probably still all fresh and functioning quite well.
Yeah, that's well said. My answer really is just that, hey, you're 6 months in, like it probably is a factor of you just don't really know how to push quite yet. Like you don't know what that feels like, how to manifest that kind of inner strength to push through those reps. And that's fine. Like I can't even remember 6 months into training what I was experiencing, but I'm sure that I didn't have the knowledge that you have, question asker. I was just in there trying to work hard and improve, And so the other thing I'll say is that it kind of doesn't matter if you can push to failure or not in your first 6 months or a year of training. Like the purpose is getting in there, getting better at movement, working hard, making sure that you're getting a few reps where the rep speed slows down out of necessity, not because you're being a pansy and slowing it down on purpose, but you're pushing as hard as you can and it's still not moving as fast as it can, or as fast as it was rather. So I just kind of don't think it really matters. And I wouldn't make that a stress point in your training. I would just keep showing up, trying to add 2.5 or 5 pounds whenever you can. And if it's doing sets of 6 where, hey, maybe you could have done 8 or 10, like, I don't really think it matters. If you feel like your stimulus isn't sufficient because you're not able to push that hard, then do another set. Like, do another set at 3 RIR instead of, one less set at 0 RIR. Yeah, that would be the first part of the answer. And second part, 5 days, 4 days. If you're doing 5 days and that volume is going to be the same over 4 days, then it really doesn't make a difference. In many ways, I would say that doing the same volume over 5 days is probably actually better because you're going to have higher quality sessions than trying to cram that volume into 4 days. If it is a volume overload issue and you feel like you're just doing too much volume, then yeah, maybe changing to 4 and dropping some volume is a prudent move. But like Aaron said, man, in your first 6 months, if you're eating enough food and sleeping well and keeping stress in control in daily life, you have plenty of gains to make. It's a really exciting time. And I probably wouldn't get stuck stressing the nuance so much. It can be tough when you follow someone like me with 25 years of experience. And I'm talking about the lengthen position and the short position and biomechanics and like all this stuff. And you feel like this is very important or something. And it's just not. Like in your first 6 months, none of that stuff matters. So try not to overthink and become too analytical and just focus more on just going in and doing hard work on, movements that fit your body well.
Yeah, really well said.
I'll do this one to you, bud. I think this is a dieting question. Yeah. Thoughts on training to failure and overall training intensity during a diet phase? 12 to 9% body fat for a male.
This is something that I've really gained a lot of direct personal experience with this in this past year of 2023, which I've dubbed that like Aaron's going to go do a big, long, experiment on himself for the year. Once you diet long enough, your diet fatigue will increase, your energy levels will decrease, your recovery capacity decreases. These things are all very well observed, and I think people would be kind of silly to try and debunk them. I also, at the same time, think people kind of preemptively mentally shoot themselves in the foot by being like, all right, I'm dieting now, so I can't train hard, or I need to reduce things, or the reason I didn't train good today is because I've been in this diet and those sorts of things. And I feel like you can really, really mentally limit yourself with that, especially if you're training by yourself or fearful of things. But this is just anecdote of my own. But I mean, I'm literally training as harder than I ever have, with intensity literally through the roof. I've dieted for 22 weeks straight. I'm down like 27 pounds or something like that. And I'm, aside from pressing movements, I'm still setting some PRs on things. Like I just set a 3 rep PR on the pendulum squat yesterday. That's like 3 reps more than I did when I was literally at the final week of my bulk. I have direct experience with it being, the opposite of that, but it does require like much more mental fortitude. I'm uncomfortable quite a lot. It doesn't feel good except mentally once you've completed it. But don't mentally kind of shoot yourself in the foot. But you need to be aware of your resources are in more limited capacities. That is 100% true.
Yeah, 12 to 9% is a pretty significant drop from like a low body fat to a really low body fat. Way different than going from 18 to 15% body fat or something like that.
Yep.
But with that said, I don't think that needs to necessarily change training intensity. I do think maybe it changes training volume a little bit. And so I think one of the keys that I've noticed with myself, and I've seen across the natural bodybuilding spectrum recently through people like Barakat and Steve Hall and others that are in the competitive natural physique space, is that they've all kind of done the same thing where they're prioritizing intensity and maintaining load on these movements as they diet. And if that means that they have to do less volume, then they do that, because maintaining load is kind of your mostly surefire way that you're not losing muscle. I would feel much more confident to say that you're maintaining muscle if you're able to maintain your 4-plate hack squat for the same number of reps than I would if you were like, well, I'm going to drop to 3 plates, but I'm going to do 4 sets of 10 instead of 1 set of 6 or something along those lines. I think that that's a slippery slope, or when you start accepting that dropping load is okay, that you can, it's slippery slope is just the right way of saying that. You can end up in a place where you're actually not pushing yourself sufficiently to maintain the muscle and send that signal anymore. So yeah, I think keep intensity high is my general recommendation. Don't be scared, because as long as you're getting like some pre-training fuel in, you're not doing it fasted, you're taking care of your sleep and, you know, the other aspects of life, the intangibles, your body's not completely brittle. You're going to be okay. Like, I've gotten down to 9% body fat and felt okay for the most part. I mean, not as good as I felt at 12 or 15%, but that's part of the cost of doing business. So keep intensity high, try to keep your training loads to where they were in the off season. And if you have to drop volume, do so.
Yep. Very well said. In a leg curl, straighten the legs completely or stop them just a tad bit before to not engage the calf, but sacrifice the full stretch.
So I actually think when you straighten the legs completely, depending on how you're set up for your leg curl, you might actually be losing tension at the stretch. Like the natural inclination is to think that because you're straightening your leg that you're fully lengthening the muscle or stretching the muscle fully. But think about, in an incline dumbbell curl, you can straighten your arm completely at the bottom, but that doesn't mean that your bicep is stretching more, because there's not actually any tension at the bottom. You're fighting gravity, and thus your bicep is long, but it's not under tension at length. And then you compare that to the studies that show preacher curls are more hypertrophic than incline dumbbell curls, even though you don't actually reach that fully lengthened position, because there's more tension in the lengthened portion of that specific movement. So I think the same principles can be applied here to the leg curl, in that if you are losing tension at that lengthened position because you're straightening your legs, it's probably an unproductive place to be. And if you can maintain higher degrees of tension on the muscle by stopping at 5 or 10 degrees shy of fully straight, that's probably sufficient. I've found for me, when I do the leg curl where I lean forward, that I can get significant length on the hamstring without fully lengthening the leg, or rather fully straightening the leg. But if I'm sitting back in the leg curl machine, then when I get up to that top position, it's often that I do lose tension. And so I tend to err on the side of not fully straightening, but maximizing the tension at the most length that I can achieve. And then to address the second part of the question on involving the calves, yes, I think, it has been shown that the first 15 degrees of the leg curl are going to be driven significantly by the gastroc in the calf. And so one way you can get around that is by slowing your rep speed in the first 15 degrees and then picking speed up as you pass the 15 degree point. So I do that often. If I'm ever in a point where I am straightening my legs fully, I'll try to slow down that initial phase of the movement and then pick up speed. Also remember to keep your foot dorsiflexed. So, point your toes towards your knees. That can help you eliminate the calf, because it pre-stretches the calf, which doesn't allow it to contribute as much into that motion. Whereas if you were plantar flexed, where your toes are pointing away from you, you would be engaging calf from the get-go. So those little pieces, those little subtleties help. But generally, I will stop reps just shy of completely straightening my legs.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add on the back end of that one, except that I think it can be machine dependent. If you have like a prone hamstring curl that when your knee is fully stretched, you're still under load, like there's still a high amount of tension there, I would straighten it. Same thing with a seated leg curl. Many machines are honestly designed. I don't know if necessarily poor might be a good term to use for what we're looking for, but from the safety of the majority of Gen Pop person from hyperextending their knee, that's probably their primary concern. But yeah, I would say it will be equipment specific there.
Yep. All right. We have 4 questions to go and we don't have a ton of time. So let's try to get through these relatively quickly here. Yep. What do you do when you lose the fire to train for weeks or months?
In my experience, this has been an environment related thing. it's time to go to a different gym, change your training modality or something like that. Every time that I've had like when it's prolonged for weeks, when it might be a deload thing. It might be your gym environment's poor. You maybe need a training partner. Maybe like times where I was like burnout on CrossFit and then burnout on powerlifting. Like I just needed to change my training modality and set some different goals and stuff. That would be my recommendation there.
Yeah, environment is good. I agree with the changing of the training modality. So oscillating between different training styles. So like, as y'all know, I'm a proponent of relatively low to moderate volumes. Actually, that's addressed in a subsequent question here. But if I'm burning out, say, on training with low to moderate volumes to failure on everything, there are times that I go into what I call a strength or a neural phase, and I'll drop training to 3 times a week, full body, maybe, 1 session every 3 days. So maybe it's actually 3 sessions over 9 days, and I'll do higher volumes further from failure. So I might, do 5 sets of pendulum for sets of 5, but I'll do them all at 5 RIR. And that seems to be quite helpful. Instead of going in and being like, I'm doing 2 sets of pendulum to failure, I'll do 5 sets to 5 RIR in these like lower strength based neural rep ranges. It's significantly less demand on the brain to ready for the quote unrack to get into each set. It's much less of a burden. And so, changing up training modality or training style is very helpful. Sometimes you just need time off. So maybe you do take 2 or 3 weeks off. Mike Israetel is a huge fan of active recovery twice a year. And that seems like a lot. I can't say that I've done this, but he takes 2 weeks off every 6 months, and he'll just not go to the gym. He'll just go out and walk and play sports and jujitsu. I don't know, whatever else he does. But basically he'll take 2 weeks every 6 months and not train. And I don't do that, but I could imagine that coming back after 2 weeks of not training would really ignite the fire again. And if you're doing that every 6 months, I feel like you're constantly kind of reinvigorating yourself. So something like that might be worth trying as well.
Good additions.
Yep.
I'll take this one if you want.
Yep. All right. Explain the methods, sets, rep ranges for a female toning and gaining muscle without gaining size.
It is exactly the same. It is exactly the same as the males, right? Toning is just another word for gaining muscle and having less body fat, right? Women, there's beautiful research on this. Women accumulate muscle tissue at a same relative rate that men do. From an absolute standpoint, obviously men are larger on population averages and therefore have more absolute muscle mass to gain, but from relative, strength in hypertrophy standpoints, women will accumulate muscle the same way that men do in the same rates. They will train and should train the exact same way. The nuance there being women tend to handle a little bit more volume on a population level, but there's, gaining muscle and gaining quote unquote size is the exact same thing. The quote unquote size is typically also correlated with a higher increase in body fat. So keep your surpluses in check, be a little bit more conservative and do your due diligence with nutrition, and it will be literally identical. Maybe a little bit less chest volume and a little bit more shoulder and glute volume. But other than that, things are rather identical, whether people want to believe that or not.
Yeah, I get this question a lot in my Paragon group because it's a primarily female-driven program. And so there are I agree with your answer for sure. I'll add a little bit of nuance and context in that when people ask me this question, it's been phrased differently where the question is often comes to me as, I am as big as I want to be. I don't want to gain any more muscle, but I want to, keep the muscle that I have and still be like a fitness person, et cetera, however that's phrased. The answer that I usually give is, well, first off, it comes down to nutrition. So if you don't want to gain any more size, you can mitigate the accruement of size by being at a slight deficit of calories more or less permanently. Like if you just always live just under maintenance, or periods of time maybe at maintenance, majority of time under maintenance, your body's not going to gain muscle, especially as a semi more advanced athlete. Like if you're someone that's close to your potential, or you're as big as you want to be, if you just cut calories, you're probably just going to cut your ability to continue gaining muscle over time. So there's one example. If you're training hard and you are eating in a surplus, you're going to gain muscle. Like that's just the way that the body reacts to that. So it's physiological. If you want to not gain size, you have to eat less food. Second is you can do a couple other things. You could lower your rep ranges significantly. So you could do sets of 1 to 3, and then you're basically staying out of the hypertrophy rep range. And so you can continue to gain strength and actually train like an athlete without necessarily putting on more size. Second, you could stay in the hypertrophy rep ranges, but you could leave 7, 8, 10 RIR on all your sets. Like you could do 4 sets of 10 on a bench press where you could do 20 reps, and you're probably not going to add any size that way too. So there's a few different ways that you could approach that.
Good addition, sir.
Yeah. All right. Here's a big question. We have 2 left. You and Bryan both clearly push each set and both have great physiques, yet you run high, mid to high volume programs, and Bryan runs mid-low to low volume programs. How do you both view the volume discrepancy in light of the fact that you both are still progressing and achieving success? Coming from a place of the question, having historically more success with higher volumes, but has a baby coming and knows that volume will need to be reduced.
The only way I can think of this answer is, there's multiple ways to skin a cat, right? Mm-hmm. Proverbially, we even at the highest levels, there's the people that say low volume, high intensity is the way. The people that do high volume are, idiots. And then there's the high volume people that say high volume is the way. The low intensity people are idiots. I think there are likely other facets that dictate whether people gravitate more towards high volume or low volume, proximity to failure being one, some historical biases maybe being another, other things like recovery capacity that also impacts that. To kind of get to the root of the question, it sounds like he's fearful of things potentially losing because of the reduction in volume that will need to be done once the baby gets there. And to where I would say you can just increase that through like myo reps and those sorts of things, where if I'm being honest, if I know I have like 40 minutes to train, maybe 4 days per week, and I want to still maximize, the effectiveness, quote unquote, of my training, I'm probably just going to do myo rep sets across everything. It's probably going to be miserable from your heart rate standpoint and how it subjectively feels, but you can squeeze in a lot of, to bring up what we talked about very early in the podcast, the effective reps model by doing this, and just training very close in proximity to failure, and then using incomplete rest methods to just basically hot lap those final reps before failure. So that is a way that you can get in high volume-esque amounts of like effective reps, but with a total lower volume done through basically manipulating the rest time variable.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. I think myo reps and intensity techniques are a great way to go there for this guy, who's about to have a baby. As far as the first part of the question, I don't have a great answer. Everyone's an individual, unique differences between our physiology and biology, and thus people will respond to different things. Part of my low volume, higher intensity approach is because that's how I enjoy training. And so it actually may be that I would get better results training with higher volumes and higher intensities, or maybe higher volumes and lower intensities. I just don't enjoy that type of training. I don't want to be in the gym for that long. And I already feel like I'm in there long enough because I take pretty long rest periods and things like that. So a lot of the way I train is based on the way that I enjoy to train. And I think that most people that have 15, 20, 25 years of experience are going to gravitate to a style of training that they enjoy, and thus probably is more productive for them because they enjoy it and they keep showing up over time. And we've said this over and over, like studies have shown this too. The majority of gains you get are in the first 5 to 10 years. And if you were to take somebody that was training completely optimal for them in
the first 5 to 10 years versus training not optimal for them over 20 years, at the end of those 20 years, they're probably at the exact same place anyways, because you maxed out your genetic limit, whether you were training optimally in the beginning or not. You eventually got to a point where you just got the majority or 99% of the gains that you were going to get anyways. And so I think looking at it as the way this question is phrased is a little bit short-sighted. And hey, how can I get the gains right now in this like 1 year period, when the real gold is found at the end after you've put in 15, 20, 25 years of training? And you're probably going to be at the same place anyways, regardless of which approach you took. So maybe taking the prudent approach that keeps you injury free and keeps you motivated is probably the one that's going to get you there, and then allow you to train for another 20 years after that as well. So you have to think about that too. The second part of the question about having the baby. So one thing that worked really well for me, and I don't know if this person has a home gym or access to a home gym, but I trained basically 12 times a week when I had a baby, and the second time. So the first time I did it 3 times a week, full body. And that was tough because I would have to get 2 hours of time to be like, I have to do my full body. The second time with the baby, I did 12 times a week, but every session was 20 to 30 minutes. So I would go down into my basement and I would do push. Then a few hours later, when the baby was sleeping, I'd go down in the basement and I'd do pull. And then the next day I would do hams. And then the next day I would do quads. And the next day I would do push. And the next day I would do pull. And like literally I just alternated between whatever felt recovered. And I would do them in 20 to 30 minute sessions and just knock them out. And then boom, on with life, back to being a super dad, and fitting in these 20 to 30 minute mini sessions twice a day would kind of be the goal. Some days it was once a day, some days it wasn't, but that was kind of how I approached it. And so there are two very different approaches. There's the 3 times a week full body where you need a whole shit ton of time. And then there's the 20 to 30 minute sessions in. And I think both can be extremely effective. And it really just depends on what works with your life and your setup with your wife and your family and stuff like that.
Well said.
Yeah. Last question. How many exercises would you program for the lower body in a session? And just to drop that, we'll probably be doing our design series on quads and hams and stuff in the new year. So this can be a nice little teaser for that.
I guess the way I'll answer this is what I would probably program for at the most, right? And then knowing that this would be like the most I would probably put in a program, but there would be many reasons where there would be less than this. So here I go. A bilateral quad exercise, like a hack squat, for example, a shortened quad exercise, like a leg extension, a lengthened hamstring exercise, like a RDL, a shortened hamstring exercise, like a prone lying leg curl, a calf exercise, like a standing calf variation, a glute biased or focused exercise, maybe like a Smith machine reverse lunge. And then if we were really trying to prioritize a leg, maybe a unilateral leg movement, which would be like a, not a Bulgarian because we just did the reverse lunge, but maybe like a single leg version of something like that. So that would be like 7 is probably the most that I would probably do.
Yeah, per the question prior about my volume and your volume, my answer was going to be 4 or 5 movements at most. And I hesitate to even say 5 because I've been involved in my own leg sessions. And I know that by the time I get through 4 movements, I already feel like I'm more crushed than I need to be. And doing a 5th almost would seem like overkill. And so I'd refer the listener back to the question about our different training styles. But I think, a short overload quad movement, like a leg extension, a lengthened quad movement, like a pendulum or a hack squat, a shortened overload, or I don't even want to say shortened overload hamstring movement, but a knee flexion hamstring movement. So one that curls your feet towards your butt would probably be pretty important. And then one that has a hip hinge. It could be like a seated leg curl paired with a hip extension, a weighted hip extension, or maybe a lying leg curl paired with an RDL. And I think those 4 really cover you because you're going to get some glutes in there with the RDL for sure. If you really wanted to throw a 5th movement in, I think there's potentially room for a single leg movement, which will give you more glutes due to pelvic instability. So like you said, a reverse lunge or a split squat of some sort would at least get you more glutes in there, get you a little bit of a different stimulus than what you were working with the other 4 movements. And then if you want to throw calves in there, I guess you could call it 6 movements. But I think 4 to 5 is where I usually land. And that usually would be a total of 8 to 12 sets total, work sets across the hamstrings and quads.
5 to 6, I would say, is more typical for myself. That 7 would be a maximum if someone was really swinging for the fences.
Yep. Cool. Well, that's awesome, man. That was a really solid final episode of the year.
It was. So I know you got to go, Bryan, so I'll kind of button this one up. But as always, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for making our 3rd year of Eat, Train, Prosper. Just very fun and cool to do. We've both received some very cool feedback that a lot of people really love the podcast and stuff, and that it just feels good knowing that we're doing good and helping in the industry and stuff like that. So Bryan and I will catch you guys in January for the start of year 4 of Eat, Train, Prosper. Have a wonderful Christmas or any of the varieties of the end of the year holidays that are important to you and your religion, and happy end of year. And we will talk to you in 2024.
Thanks, guys.